it was fascinating to see that so many Iranians kind of saw themselves as white.
I feel like, especially for Iranians, I remember when when the Black Lives Matter protests were at their zenith last year. And we had a couple of people on the show come and say, this is important for us as Iranians to be part of this. We're also people of color. We're also minorities. And we got a bunch of pushback, from the audience, people saying, we're not black people. We're not minority. And even the idea of being minorities is difficult for some Iranians. and you kind of think, at the end of the day, the white supremacist is not going to separate us out of the pack. As Banafsheh Akhlaqi has said on this program when she was talking about how hard she was working after the Patriot Act after 9/11, when in those jail cells when they were rounding up people, they weren't sort of discerning which one's the Iraqi and which one's the Iranian and which one's the Jewish guy. They were just putting them all in the cell. If they're coming for them, they're coming for us too, right? Absolutely. And so it's so important, and I don't know how you work to impress that kind of idea on so-called non-believers, if you will, say even in our community, in the Iranian community.
I think the kind of the issues of identity became really fascinating during kind of the post-George Floyd and the kind of the BLM movement. It was fascinating, and I think it was very generationally interesting. Even in my home, I have 3 children, as you mentioned. My eldest, are in their 20s. And we had really interesting dinner conversations about how we self-identify. And, my daughters, for the first time, told me we consider ourselves, people of color. And that term, or, to be a brown person, those were terminology that I hadn't used about myself, but they made me think about it. I said, you know what? Yes, we are. Of course we are. And as an Iranian American, that's been the term that I self-reference, and the way I identify myself as I'm an Iranian American. But where do we fit into this mix? And where are we in terms of our rights as a minority community? Where is our voice being represented? Who is speaking for us? It was fascinating to see that so many Iranians kind of saw themselves as white. Yeah. And whether that was a socioeconomic reference, because thankfully many are well-to-do and many do live in neighborhoods, with affluence. Was it is it a political reference, with, affiliation with the Republican Party or the Democratic Party? But we didn't really think about the race issue and ethnic issue and how do we fit in. So these were, a lot of it was first-time conversations. So we have to be patient with ourselves, and I think hopefully with kindness and respect, have these difficult, thorny conversations, because we are, it's been 40 years, more than 40 years since our revolution, but we're still new at this. And to be immersed into kind of the complexity of anti-racist movements in America and the history of slavery in this country, and how do we fit into all of that is complicated. And we need time to kind of delve into it. Hopefully we come to it with open eyes, and we come to it from a place of learning and curiosity and not racism, because we did see that. And unfortunately, in many of our communities, there was a very strong reaction to the BLM protests and vilifying many of the protesters who were nonviolent. I mean, of course, there was violence in some of the protests as well. But some of it left kind of a bad taste in my mouth in terms of what I saw some of our community members depict those marches, not really having an understanding of what is it reflecting, what kind of history, what is the history of slavery in this country, of institutional racism in this country. Why is there this fear of law enforcement and police? And we have to come to all these realities with open eyes and kind of an open heart, and then figure out our own place in it, and what is our, hopefully, additive, and what is our contribution. And it makes me so happy when I see members of our community kind of getting into public life, running for office. That's a place where I feel our community has kind of been a little bit lacking. When I see young Iranian Americans kind of really vie for that kind of public service, it makes me really happy. And it forces some of these questions on us. How do we self-identify? And of course, we all as individuals can do that. But as a community also, where do we show up? Where do we show up as allies? Where do we show up in coalitions to not only promote our own self-interest, but to make our communities as a whole better?